Welcome back.
Yes, sir.
Round two. I Never Knew TV, Dr. Umar, right? First question I have is, what do you believe are the primary contributing factors to the disproportionate maternal mortality rates amongst Black women? And what are the solutions?
Maternal mortality in Black women, and I would also add infant mortality along with it, because sometimes the mother dies, sometimes the child dies, sometimes they both die. The question we got to ask, African people were on this planet by ourselves. The modern man, the modern African, the Homo sapiens sapien, the most recent of all the human stages. We were on this planet alone by ourselves for at least 50,000 years before we left the continent and went anywhere else. At least 50. Some would say as much as 150,000 years. Some would say longer. No matter what number you go with, whether it's 50,000, 100,000, 150,000 years, Black women had no problem having babies in ancient times. In ancient times, the infant mortality rate was known to be small. How is it possible that the oldest human being in history, the Black woman, been having babies for millennium? Babies for millennium. All of a sudden, she gets to America and she can't have a baby without the baby dying or herself dying. I believe that this is intentional. I think it's poor prenatal care. I think it's also racism on the birthing table. I think a lot of it has to do with these chemicals that they give our women to deal with pain and ease during the birthing. I remember when my oldest daughter was born and they gave her mother epidural and they kept giving her epidural. I said, you might not want to take no more of that. That stuff is going to mess with the baby heartbeat. She took it anyway. The next thing you know, the doctor said, we have to do a cesarean section.
Tell your story, I'm going to tell mine. Go ahead.
We have to do a cesarean section. There was no conversation about cesarean section until my daughter, who was born on May 6th, Martin Delaney's birthday, grandfather of Pan-Africanism, until her mother took the epidural. And if memory serves me correctly, because that was 21 years ago, but if memory serves me correctly, they gave her at least 2, maybe even 3 doses, and then they went into the cesarean section. I think they're doing it on purpose. Number one, they get more money for the cesarean section. Okay. Number 2, it gets them off the birthing table quicker because they take the baby out and then send her to surgery to get an inside sew back up. And of course, they don't want to see more Black children being born in the first place. So that's the infant mortality. But if I can get rid of the Black woman herself, the mother, I don't have to worry about her having any more children. What's more effective, taking the child or taking the mother? Taking the mother because she's the nest, she's the birther, she can have more children. And not only are they doing this mortality, we also have to look at how a lot of Black women postnatal, post-birth, are not able to get pregnant again because whatever they're doing inside of her when they deliver that child or post-cesarean section when they tie her back up. So when we're dealing with that whole process of pregnancy, through carrying it, through birth, there's a lot being done to the Black woman that's contributing to her mortality and to the child's mortality. And I think that we could also indict the birth control pills, previous abortions. Some of these women were also taking the abortion shots. Some of them were also taking some of the abortion implants, these hormonal devices that they put inside of our women's body that messes with their hormones. I think all of this, including diet and the prenatal pills that they give them, I think all of this, as well as the chemicals they inject in them on the delivery table, I think all of this plays a role in the high mortality rate for expectant mothers, but also the high infant mortality rate for Black children as well.
And it's a mixture of capitalism and racism, because what I noticed is that, like, in my personal experience with my wife is that I spoke to a doula, right? And she was telling me a lot of times you can just change the position when the heart rate goes up with the child. So it doesn't have to be this big promotion. But what I noticed with my wife, she was there just chilling, and they just came in and rushed everything. No conversation. They try to overwhelm you with this fear. And there's no dialogue. There's no information. It's just we have to rush and do this. And as you said, what do they get paid more to do? So why wouldn't you do it?
Absolutely. And also, I believe my youngest daughter's mother gave birth to her at a birthing center. I know several doulas, women who help women give natural births, even in their home. I met a sister the other day who birthed her own child. I don't recommend that, but nonetheless, I think we need to look at more traditional modes of childbirthing. You know, I know sisters who go to Africa to birth their kids. They say, I'm having my child in Africa. My 9th month, I'm in Africa. I'm going to let the queen mothers in the village help me give birth to my child. I think we need to go back to that. I would much recommend a home birth or a birthing center. You know, and the irony of it, the biggest difference between a traditional birth and a modern birth is with a modern birth, they put you on a table. You're laying vertically. Traditional birth, you stoop down, you see. Excuse me. Modern birth, you're laying horizontally. Traditional birth, it's vertical. You stoop and your hips loosen and they help pull the baby. In other words, gravity is to your benefit with the traditional African birth. These white folks are putting us on tables. So there's very little benefit of gravity. I mean, they tilt the table somewhat, but it's not the same type of effect if you're stooping down the way you go to the bathroom to relieve yourself. And I think black women need to recognize that the way in which you're having the child isn't conducive to the natural flow of childbirth in the first place.
In a recent podcast, I heard you say something which is very true, but people don't want to hear it. You said women who wear weaves are not at peace with themselves, right? I felt you should have added the men and people who are a part of this epidemic of cosmetic surgery. A lot of times people, the big thing is the BBL, right? But we approach it from a more humorous standpoint. Ha, ha, ha. There's nothing funny about it. When I see people with weaves, when I see people with the silicone and the BBLs, I see inner turmoil.
Of course.
I see a lot of struggle where you are so displeased with yourself that you put yourself through the surgery.
Of course.
There's nothing to be joked about. I think we joke about it too much and we criticize it too much from a comedy standpoint. And we don't see the psychological impact or the psychological turmoil, spiritual turmoil a person's experiencing to do these things to themselves.
I would say, as I've often said, that people who are not at peace with themselves will often try to reinvent themselves from the outside in. You can't reinvent yourself from the outside in. You have to reinvent yourself from the inside out. All this surgery, cosmetic surgery, men and women, all this wig and weave and European hair color, all of this are signs that the person wasting all this money on trying to look like a different person is not at peace with themselves. They are not happy people. You can't be. Happy people are not overly preoccupied with how they appear to others. That is a mental illness, to be that preoccupied with your physical appearance that everything else in your life takes a back seat. And my biggest concern for my sisters, and I love all of them, you know, whether they are artificial or real. Let me clarify that. I love them if they are getting surgery, not if they're changing their gender. I got an issue with the whole childhood transgender movement, but just sisters who are getting surgery to look more womanly. My concern for them is when they become elders, when you get older, you got artificial breasts, you got artificial buttocks. What is going to happen when you're 70 years old? What happens to those breasts when they get heavy and saggy? What happens to those buttocks? What happened to those packs inside your body when they begin to bust? I don't think our black women are looking down the road long enough to life after their prime when they are still going to have these artificial objects in their body. Are you going to get them surgically removed? Maybe they'll just get them surgically removed at that time, I guess. Is there any research that discusses how toxic fake breasts are after a certain amount of time? Is there any research that addresses how toxic the butt injections or the butt implants are after a certain amount of time? Do black women even know whether these things are cancerous after a certain amount of time, as we now know the fake hair to be? I'm just concerned for the long-term health of black women. And for those black women who are carrying a child, how does that affect your ability to carry your child if you got a tummy tuck, if you got liposuction, if you got a part of your stomach taken out so you can only eat so much food so you don't get overweight again? What about the baby? If you got breast injections, can you still breastfeed? If you got breast implants, can you still breastfeed? I just think a lot of this artificial making over that black women are engaging in, it's going to stop a lot of them from being effective mothers. And to be honest with you, as a mother with an artificial body to a biological daughter, what is the message you are sending your daughter at 12 and 13 when she see mom comes home with new fake breasts, fake buttocks? Are you not teaching your daughter that what she has on her body sexually is more important than anything else she has? And to me, that's the message that black girls are getting. How I look is far more important than who I am, what I think, and what I have to offer the world. I think it's a very dangerous message that's going out to men about black women.
Well, what about the psychological?
Well, as far as the psychological impact of it, I believe the psychological damage is already done once you get on the table. I think the psychological issues are impacted even further by the fact that after a certain amount of time, a lot of these women are not even content with the new body they have because they don't understand how the mind works. If you are not at peace with yourself, it's because of something going on inside. You transform the outside, and after the honeymoon period of the new breasts and buttocks is over, you still back to not feeling good about yourself. So now you want to go back out and get some more surgery, i.e. Little Kim. And I'm not picking on my sister, Little Kim, but from what I understand from her history, she was psychologically abused by her father. And I don't know her whole life, but I saw a documentary speaking to how Little Kim was psychologically abused by her father. And I believe that that played a big role in why she underwent so much surgery. Little Kim was beautiful. Little Kim didn't need any surgery. She was a drop dead gorgeous woman. She didn't need the surgery. But because of what was done to her by her father, I believe, and I could be wrong, just with the limited information that I have, I believe that had a lot to do with why Little Kim went on the slicing table. And I think that has a lot to do with why a lot of black women go on the slicing table, being rejected by men, mistreated by men, abandoned by their parents, ridiculed for their physical appearance. Michael Jackson is a good example. Michael Jackson is the best male example of surgery being performed on your external self for problems going on in the internal self. Michael Jackson was robbed of his childhood. Michael Jackson was physically abused by his father. Michael Jackson often spoke of how his peers would talk about his big nose. Michael Jackson was traumatized by his own people for how he looked. And as a result of that, he desecrated himself physically. It's the same thing black women are doing. Someone made them feel insecure and unvalued as who they were. And so they're now seeking to reinvent themselves artificially on the surgeon's table. And it's a very dangerous thing to do.
And we spoke about the physical, we have the psychological, and the last thing people listening need to know about is the financial burden. A lot of these surgeries are done through credit.
Are done through
credit.
I wasn't aware that so many surgeries are done through credit, but I tell you something I experienced recently. I was in the airport in the Dominican Republic coming back from Guadeloupe, and I didn't get a chance to venture out into the community. It was only the airport, but I had like a 4-hour layover, and every woman who passed me was voluptuous. It took me a minute to catch on, but I'm like, every woman is super. I mean, the best bodies you ever see in your life. And then it just hit me. And I text one of my female associates and I said, where do most surgery get done? And she mentioned the Dominican Republic as one of the top destinations for the surgery because it didn't hit me at first. I said, wait a minute, all these women are just super, are they work? I mean, the Dominican Republic, they're just born like this? Then I said, wait a minute, this might be a surgery place. And that's when I found out that it was, but a lot of them will sacrifice. They sacrifice, they put up, they save their money. A lot of them are middle-class black women who can afford it. As you said, some of them are sisters who struggle financially and they do it through credit or they do it through whatever they got to do to get that money up, and it's just a shame. It's just a shame that we as black people have become so spiritually famished that we now feel that we have to desecrate our bodies in order to feel better about ourselves. You see it with the childhood transgender movement, these young children. And of course, in California, sexual reassignment surgery is totally legal. You have children out here, Dwayne Wade's son and others, getting sexual surgery to reinvent themselves in the opposite sex before they even old enough to responsibly make that kind of a permanent decision for themselves. And we as Black people are overlooking the fact that this childhood transgender movement, which was refueled by President Barack Obama while he was in office, is nothing other than a form of genocide and extermination. When a boy decides to get sexual reassignment surgery to become an artificial woman, he castrates himself. They remove his testicles from his scrotum. This is no different than the white man hanging the black man in Reconstruction America. We are now voluntarily castrating ourselves. When they take your testicles out of your scrotum, they can't put them back. They're never having children ever. When the girl undergoes sexual reassignment surgery to become an artificial man, they remove her ovaries. She's never ovulating again. She's never getting pregnant. Why are we as Black people allowing our children to make permanent decisions about their ability to reproduce? This is not just a decision about whether you want to be a girl or whether you want to be a boy. No, this is a decision about your capacity to reproduce yourself when you become an adult. Once they reassign you, they castrate and sterilize you. Reproduction is over. And Black people, so caught up in the LGBT crusade, are not seeing the fact that this is not about LGBTQ. This is about the genocide of African people disguised as childhood transgender. And then there's another point: pedophilia. The pedophiles are active supporters of the LGBTQ movement. Why? Why do the pedophiles care about lesbians, bisexuals, homosexuals, and transgenders? If I am a pedophile, I don't want to go to jail. I'm a celebrity, I'm famous. Ritualistic sex is what we do with kids. It's part of our demonic culture. I want pedophilia to become normal. I want it stricken from the criminal code altogether. I'm going to push LGBTQ, because if a child is old enough to decide that they want to live their life as the opposite gender, if a child is old enough to decide, I want permanent sexual reassignment surgery, if a child is old enough to decide, I never want to have children, take my testicles, take my ovaries. If an 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old child is old enough to make those three decisions, how can you argue that they're not old enough to decide to have sex? The argument of the pedophile is going to be backed up by this LGBT crusade against our children, because in their sick minds, they are rationalizing the argument before the courts. If he's old enough to say, I don't want my testicles, if she's old enough to say, I never want to have children, if he's old enough to say, I want to live my life as a girl, if she's old enough to say, I want to live a life as a boy and I don't care about having kids, and she can say this at 12, is she not also old enough to decide when she's ready to have sex? That is going to be the argument that the pedophiles are going to take into court. And unfortunately, although I don't agree with it, I think they're going to win the argument. LGBTQ is the mask the pedophile movement wears to get their agenda pushed. And LGBTQ is the mask genocide wears to depopulate the world of African people.
Please speak about comedian Just Hilarious, who has been receiving a lot of backlash for her comments, where she stated, I'm not quoting directly, but the gist is that trans women are not biologically the same as women.
I stand with my sister Just Hilarious. I'm glad she took the stand, because so many Black women are afraid to speak up. First of all, I want to make sure people understand what I perceive to be the clear threat in this instance. And I don't know if you can remember About a year ago, I was on Fox Soul with the Tammy Mack show. And she had a conversation on black male-female relationships. It was myself and another biological male. It was a biological female. And the other person who I thought was a biological female was a artificial woman, meaning he's a biological male. Tammy Mack nor her producers warned us that it would not be two women, two biological women and two biological men. She snuck the transgender in and didn't tell us. Why would a black woman be having a biological male, AKA artificial woman, discussing women's issues, black women's issues, as if he were a woman? I said then that black women better stand up and speak out against this, because the American white power structure is engineering a situation where the natural voice of the biological black woman will be permanently silenced and replaced with artificial women, biological men, who will be standing in and speaking as if they're real black women. And the threat in this is the fact that what really matters to black women will never be discussed in the public forum, because the government can control the narrative of the black woman by using these biological men disguised as women. So what Just Hilarious is doing is important. It's critical that it gets done. We're not going to allow her to get canceled. She's doing the right thing. A biological man can never be a biological woman. He will never get a menses. His breast will never develop milk. He will never carry a child. Last time I checked, women have an XX chromosome. Men have an XY, if I'm not mistaken. It doesn't matter how much sexual reassignment surgery you get. You will never have a double X chromosome. Men cannot be women. They can only be made to look like them. Women cannot be men. They can only be made to look like them. But here's the difference. I don't really see biological women living as artificial men trying to speak for black men. I don't see that. I'm seeing biological men living as artificial women trying to speak for black women. And I think the reason why this agenda is in play is black women, unfortunately, not because there's anything wrong with her, but because of the oppression of black men, she's the leading political voice. The black woman is the most educated in our community. The black woman is the most financially stable in our community. So from the perspective of the white power structure, the way that they're seeing, we've already neutralized black men as much as we can for now. We now got to work on these black women who are becoming increasingly more militant and politically conscious. They see the woke black woman as a threat now. They used her to subdue the man. Now we got to subdue her. So what we're going to do is use these artificial women, these biological men disguised as black women, and we're going to let them be the mouthpiece so we can control the narrative. I hope sisters recognize how important what Just Hilarious is doing. You cannot let the white power structure silence your voice and replace you with biological men disguised as women. The last point I want to say on this issue with Just Hilarious as it relates to the racist agenda to replace the authentic biological black woman's voice with an artificial biological man's voice disguised as a black woman. Black women have to take some responsibility for this, because black women, many of them, were open proponents of homosexuality. Black women thought it was cute. They thought it was funny. They have black male friends. They hang out with black gay men. The reason black women got to be held partially responsible for this transgender issue, where they want to silence their voice with an artificial woman's voice, is if you supported homosexuality as much as black women did, you allow black men to go to the edge of the diving board. Now he wants to jump off the diving board into the water. He says, I no longer want to just be gay or act as a woman. I want to live as a woman. That's the leap that was made from homosexuality to transgender. So although I'm standing in solidarity with my black queens, I need them to understand y'all helped give birth to this biological man reborn as artificial black woman phenomena that the government is now going to try to use to silence your voice. Black women helped encourage this move. They didn't know it would lead to this, but I need them to see how not looking long enough or being visionary enough, looking at the long-term consequences of the stuff that we support, you actually provided the momentum for the transition from homosexual to artificial woman. I think the reason a lot of black women were comfortable with black gay males is, number one, they accepted them. The black gay male was able to understand them in a way that they wish the heterosexual black male would. Black women have a need to be accepted and honored by black men. For women who could not get that from a heterosexual, they substituted it socially for the homosexual. In other words, a black woman wants a close relationship with her father. She can't find a black man to have that type of intimacy with, not sexually, but psychologically. But the gay black male can do that for her. The black woman needs a man to talk her issues through. She can't talk about the rape with her dad. He don't understand. She can't talk about the molestation with her brother or her uncle. She can do it with the gay black man. So I believe the gay black man for the black woman became a substitute upon which she could thrust a lot of her internal issues that she never felt comfortable with enough discussing with heterosexual male. And it's not the fact that he's gay. It's the fact that he can take her perspective better because he's trying to be her.
Can Black Americans effectively implement mutual aid societies to improve their collective financial, social, and health status?
That's a great question. Can the American African create beneficial mutual aid societies to improve ourselves economically, politically, socially, and otherwise? Absolutely. The oldest mutual aid society in American African history was founded in Philadelphia. And it was founded by Richard Allen, the father of the AME Church, and Absalom Jones. And it was called the Free African Society. Free African Society, where blacks during the revolutionary period came together with their money and financed their cemeteries, financed care for their elders, financed schools, financed churches, financed life insurance. This is Black Wall Street before Black Wall Street. And this is during slavery. And it started in Philadelphia, but it was widespread. It went all over the country. There's nowhere you could find black people before the Garvey era, the 1920s, who did not belong to or was not benefited by black self-help organizations or mutual aid societies, as you mentioned. In fact, one of my Pan-Africanist forefathers by the name of Alexander Crummell, who is a pioneering black social worker, although he was not trained as a social worker, he was a pioneering black social worker. He was also the first black man to start a intellectual society for our community. He was the mentor to W.E.B. Du Bois, and he was one of the most pioneering and innovative black social workers we had. He went around the country helping black communities build mutual aid societies. The question we got to ask ourselves, since we come from a history of self-help organizations going back to the 1700s and Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, why don't we have any today? Where are the mutual aid societies today? Because the black church is no longer a mutual aid society, even though many of the mutual aid societies began in the black church. Think about it. If you don't pay into that church and pay into that church a lot, they will not bury you. A lot of churches have no life insurance programs. A lot of churches have no program for the homeless. Churches used to give out food if you were hungry. A lot of churches don't even do that anymore. So the black church has completely failed us. But even going outside of the black church, you don't see a lot of mutual aid societies because black people have gotten comfortable with government handouts. And I believe that it was an intentional strategy of the government to create the New Deal and other social service programs which they copied from the black community, like free breakfast and free medical care that the Black Panther Party partially engineered, picking up from where Marcus Garvey, the Honorable Marcus Garvey, left off. I think the government deliberately overtook the social service programs so black people would get dependent on the government, no longer self-sufficient, so they could control our destiny in our communities. If we still had mutual aid societies, I'm not sure there's black poverty at all. And if there was, it would definitely be much more manageable than it is now. One of the things I want to do, once the Frederick Douglass Marcus Garvey Academy is done, we're going to start a self-help society, a mutual aid society, because there's so much we can do as a people on our own and by ourselves. And we need to get back to that Marcus Garvey, Richard Allen, Pan-Africanist, do for self model.
And how's the progress with the school going?
Where we at right now, our electric is completely done, inspected and approved. Our plumbing is completely done, inspected and approved. Our sprinklers are completely done, inspected and approved. Our burglar alarms, fire alarm system, completely done, inspected and approved. The gym is completely done. The only thing left now is we got 2 HVAC splits that got to be replaced in the data room and the computer room in the school. And we have some air distributor covers and air recycler covers in some of the classrooms that got to be replaced. Once that's done, I'm calling the city of Wilmington to see when we could get a certificate of occupancy.
Over the last decade, especially during COVID, schools have struggled with finding teachers. Now I understand schools can't find principals. Why are people avoiding leadership roles in public schools?
Why are people avoiding leadership roles in public schools? I would say that the move by educators and principals away from the schoolhouse predates COVID. I would say COVID has probably intensified that exodus out of the schoolhouse by principals and teachers. I also think during the COVID quarantine period, so many opportunities arose for educators to become homeschoolers themselves, that a lot of them saw that they could make more money homeschooling 5 or 6 children in their basement than they could being a full-time teacher in a public school. We also have to keep in mind that a lot of educators are not original educators. They came to the schoolhouse out of a need for employment. You know, they were laid off from corporate America. They were laid off from the private sector. So they came into the school simply to find an economic opportunity. There was no love or commitment there for our children. And so I would argue that once a better hustle comes along, they take it. So they were never in love with educating black kids in the first place. You know, it's unfortunate because you even have black educators and principals leaving the school as well. Now, if they were leaving to build their own independent black schools, that would be a positive thing. Some of them are, but many are finding employment in other sectors. And it's hard to criticize them because I know how difficult it can be when you care to teach or to lead in a public school in this country.
And that's what I learned, that those who really care don't stay.
Yeah, it's tough. Because, and also they get overlooked a lot for higher level positions. So when I was with the school district of Philadelphia, and of course I hear about this across the country, other districts I've worked with and professionals I work with, if you are a good teacher and you're black, it works against your professional advancement because they want to keep you in the classroom. Whereas a white person will come in with not even having half of your experience, and after 2 years, they're downtown making 3 times as much money as you. And you're trapped in the school because you are good at what you do, so they want to keep you there forever. So unfortunately, it's difficult for good black principals and good black teachers to get promotions for that reason. They send the white people downtown because they know they don't care, so they give them, ironically, the better administrative job, and they trap you in the schoolhouse. That's not fair. But the bigger question for the black teacher and the black principal, why have you not organized and come together to build an independent black educators union? We don't have one. And I'm not aware of there ever having been a movement away from the American Federation of Teachers, away from the National Education Association to build an independent black teachers union. We have independent black unions for almost every profession. Teaching is one of America's oldest profession. The only thing older is the preacher, the church, because the church gave birth to education. Why haven't black teachers and principals come together to build their own union? And I think the biggest reason why is we're comfortable being led by white folks. Even though the teachers unions do not fight for black teachers the way they fight for white teachers, you regularly see black teachers get fired for reasons you will never see a white teacher get fired. But it's kind of like the Democratic Party. As long as we have something and it's led by white people, we feel comfortable with the get along to go along.
What will be the future of public education in America with this situation?
Well, I think the future for public education was dire even before COVID and even before the mass exodus of educators and principals. Charter schools were founded to defund public schools. Now you even have the voucher system, which is also founded to defund public schools. The problem with the elimination of public school, and let's keep in mind that most Americans are not in support of tax dollars going towards public education. And the reason for that is because the U.S. Constitution does not mention the word education. It does not give anybody's child a right to learn. So many people are wondering, why am I paying money for a service that my Constitution doesn't require? Most white people who have children, those children go to private schools. So Democrats and Republicans are interested in shutting down the United States Department of Education, which has only been around since the 80s. And if they had it their way, it would be gone tomorrow. The problem, though, is America's false reputation around the world that suggests she's a leader in education. And since most people see education as the passport to a better future, how can America, being the so-called land of the free and the birthplace of democracy, how can she be against public education? It doesn't look right for America's image. So from a foreign relations agenda, from an international relations agenda, America has to find a way to get rid of public education, free public ed, without affecting their image abroad. That's number one. Domestically, the biggest issue with eliminating public school is, what do you do with millions of white women who make up the teaching corps? These are voters and these are donors. How do you eliminate education when these women are the people you need at the ballot box in November? No politician wants to be in office when public school gets destroyed, because I can guarantee you, whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, or anything in between, if you are a governor, a mayor, a council person, a state rep, a U.S. congressperson, when public school is destroyed, you will not be getting reelected.
Florida has a new standard that will teach black people benefited from slavery because it was a useful skills. What useful skills are they referring to?
That agenda by Governor DeSantis, this new Florida state mandate educational curriculum requirement that the enslavement of African people be treated as if it was a benevolent institution that afforded us some useful skills, is absolutely disrespectful. It is outright untrue. It is an insult to African people. And I'm not surprised that they're doing this, because one thing about white people, when they smell blood, they go for the kill. And America is more anti-black today than any time since the 1960s. So if black people are going to stand by and let white people trample all over their self-respect and their dignity and their human rights, that's exactly what they're going to do. But I also think we have to keep an eye on the White House, because I find it interesting that President Joe Biden hasn't said much or done much about this. Although education is not a federal right, it is not a constitutional right, but it is a state right. And as a state right, the federal government has an obligation to make sure the 14th Amendment's equal protection clause is upheld wherever the states guarantee a right to a free education. So I am of the position that this slanderous inclusion of slavery as having been beneficial because it taught skills, which is easily refutable as an untruth, I believe that that could be fought against. I believe that that could be struck down because it is harmful and it is dangerous to teach that to black children. In fact, it does the very thing that the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision sought to undo, and that was to eliminate the harm caused to black children by segregation. Now you have harm being caused to black children by virtue of this new mandated curriculum. So I'm wondering why the Justice Department, I'm wondering why the Secretary of State, I'm wondering why President Joe Biden himself has not taken this up as a 14th Amendment issue. In fact, what the president could do with the stroke of a pen is tell Governor DeSantis and any other governor in America where there is a law that forbids the teaching of slavery or racism, if this is what you want to do, if you want to teach that slavery was beneficial because it taught skills, then guess what? We're going to cut all your federal funding. We're going to cut your special ed money. We're going to cut your Title I money. We're going to cut your JROTC money. We're going to cut all of your federal money because this is discriminatory education, which is not allowed under the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause.
Do you believe there's a possibility of this standard becoming nationwide in the future?
I do. I think there's a possibility of the standard becoming nationwide. We already have a growing standard where states are not allowing slavery to be taught and they're not allowing racism to be taught. So you already see that the climate is already there. As far as I'm concerned, it's pretty much a standard anyway. But again, I believe that the Democratic Party is co-signing this behavior by not pushing back with threats with regard to elimination of federal funding. Their funds should be snatched if this is what they want to do.
Please tell me what hostile personality disorder is and why you believe it's a key contributor to the crisis of high blood pressure amongst black people in America.
Hypertension is a big issue. It's a top 10 killer for black people. Hostile personality disorder, in my opinion, is an outgrowth of that hypertension. And it speaks to the tension and the anger and the negativity that and hostility that black people have towards one another. I think a lot of times when we see each other, when we engage each other, when we conversate with each other, we do so with an expectation of disrespect. We do so with an expectation of disagreement. We do so with an expectation of confrontation. So when black people disagree with each other, automatically our blood begins to boil, our pressure begins to rise, because that environment is one that we've seen so many times lead to conflict and casualty. And I think there's a lot of brothers and sisters out there who are contributing to their very own high blood pressure by constantly walking around with this hostile personality disorder that I don't think is necessary. If you have to go to war, then your body will be prepared to go to war at that moment. But I don't think you should walk around with the expectation and presumption that if you have to have a disagreement with a black person, it can't be respectful and that it has to lead to conflict. So I think hostile personality disorder is a big problem in the black community.
And it's wild because I remember growing up, I grew up in East Orange, right? And I just remember that reflecting on my youth, I couldn't be nice for survival purposes in that environment. It's like if you're nice, it's like you're targeted in a sense. So you have to have a certain level of hostility to survive in these environments.
That speaks to the lack of community. You know, that's why we call them hoods, because we don't have neighborhoods. If we had a neighborhood, you can be yourself. If we had a neighborhood, you can be at peace with people. You could wear your real skin, your real personality, your real disposition. But I see this in the schools with the children, where the nicest of children have to act tough. They have to act hostile. They have to act like they're big and bad, because if I don't, somebody may try me. So we do have an issue in society in general, but particularly in our community, because that's what we're speaking of, where black people, children in particular, feel like I got to act like I'm tougher than leather so nobody will bother me. And I think that's a shame, because that also contributes to the release of cortisol and other hormones in the body that contribute to high blood pressure, weakened immune systems, and all types of other issues. That anger, that low-grade contextual anger and anxiety that Black people carry with them on a regular basis, I believe is an underrated contributor to the disease culture we have, the cancer culture that we have, and of course, the negative interactions and relationship culture that we have as well.
Poverty is the fourth leading cause of death in America. Do you see the poverty situation improving or getting worse for Black people in America?
Poverty will only get worse for Black people. I think it's going to get worse for everyone. But when America catches a cold, we get the flu. We have to understand poverty is absolutely essential for capitalism to survive. In order for capitalism to survive, you got to have a large, exploitable population of free laborers. If there's no broke people to slave for the corporations can't get rich. The whole idea behind capitalism is you make people work for pennies while you rake in millions. And because of that, for that reason, there will always be poverty. But the reason it's going to grow now more than ever in the past is, number one, we have artificial intelligence coming. And with artificial intelligence, you're going to see the elimination of a lot of jobs that otherwise help Black people take care of their bills. I read recently McDonald's laying off thousands of people, Walmart laying off thousands of people, Microsoft laying off thousands of people, Google even laid off thousands of people. So when I look at artificial intelligence and when I look at the advance of technology, it appears that it's going to lead to an ever shrinking, a smaller market for employment. And so I think Black people need to really start thinking about this right now and get ahead of it before it's too late. And I also think this poverty is being engineered as well, because poverty is one of the most effective weapons you can use to keep down population, to keep up crime, to keep up political disorganization. Impoverished communities are rarely effective politically. Rarely, because why? They're overly consumed with their day-to-day needs being met. So I think a lot of it is being engineered. You know, in the Black community in particular, we know that they came into our community and destroyed the economic foundation, the industrial building trades back in the 1970s. They induced the poverty to give rise to the mass incarceration system in the single-parented, female-headed household. So I think a lot of it is engineered, but most of it is a byproduct of capitalism. And one of the things I try to get Black people to see and to understand, capitalism only worked because they had a 500-year head start through our enslavement. Slavery was the original capital. We were the original investment. We was the original stock. So of course, capitalism looks good because you're not looking at it from the perspective that it got a 500-year head start by free labor of African people. Capitalism is not a system for humanity. Why would you want individuals to dominate the economy that everybody has to use in order to live? Capitalism is exploitation, and poverty is one of its side effects.
Statistics say Black women in America are 5 times more likely to get an abortion than other groups, which I feel is wrong. But people who are anti-abortion usually approach the issue from a moral standpoint. Do you believe abortion in the Black community is viewed as a moral issue or a political issue?
Both. I think abortion in the Black community is viewed as both a moral issue and a political issue. For me, it's more about the politics than the morality, because when you view it from a moral perspective, that leads to condemnation and it leads to judgment. And I don't think that really benefits us as a people. It is not my place to tell a woman what to do with her body, but at the same time, as Africans, we are fundamentally a pro-life people, because we understand that when you give birth, that is the reincarnation of an ancestor. That is a life coming to this world with a specific purpose given to it by the Supreme Almighty God. So we have to look at it from the spiritual perspective. You're actually stopping the destiny of the universe and the destiny of the Black race by aborting that child. With that being said, if you have a young sister who doesn't have any family support, you have a young sister who's the father of her child isn't interested in being there, he don't want the child. You have a young sister dealing with poverty and people are constantly telling her that you don't want to have a baby this early. And then you look at the reality that young mothers tend not to graduate high school on time, if at all. They often tend not to graduate college, if at all. Now, we all know dozens of black women who achieved in spite of, but there's so many thousands more who did not. But I think we have to look at the fact that we have aborted over 3 million babies since the 1970s. I mean, we have to look at the fact that Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood International and her Negro Project were all part of the American eugenics crusade to get rid of black life. It's no secret that 75% of Planned Parenthood abortion centers are located within close proximity to black communities. Even when you look at what Planned Parenthood is doing in the Caribbean, what they're doing in Africa, if you look purely at the numbers.
I heard Dr. Amos Wilson once say, black people have severe case of myopia, right? A lot of things we say are not there, are here. We just don't see them. For example, many programs and businesses black people say that we need are there, but they don't support them. What's your thoughts about that?
Well, shout out to Dr. Amos Wilson. I think he was the greatest black psychologist in American history. And I think he was the most relevant black scholar of the second half of the 20th century. And like myself, he was a doctor of clinical psychology and a Garveyite Pan-Africanist. I do believe that we have many institutions and businesses that are not getting the support that they should as black people complain about the need for them. But at the same time, when we're talking about the critical institutions, the banks, the hospitals, the schools, the supermarket, the distribution and manufacturing, I don't believe we have nearly as much as we should. You know, for example, you take the hospitals. We owned and controlled over 500 hospitals in American history. That's nearly one per year. You can hardly find them now. We only have about a handful of black hospitals. Independent schools, truly independent, that operate inside of a traditional school building, not in somebody's basement or kitchen table, you're probably looking at 3 dozen. If you look at truly black-owned banks, you probably may have about 2 or 3 dozen of those. So when you look at the critical institutions, we do have black farmers, but we don't have a network and a relationship between the black farmers and the black communities to get their produce out to us. And of course, we don't have the supermarkets to sell that produce on a regular basis. So when you're talking about the critical institutions, the schools, the banks, the hospitals, the supermarkets, the manufacturing and distribution, we are at a significant loss for those things. The institutions that matter most, we are at a loss for them. Now, we have restaurants and barbershops, and we need restaurants and barbershops, but they're not critical institutions. Why? Because you can get your hair cut at home. You can cut your own hair. I cut my own hair. I've been doing it since high school because we was trained to do so at my high school. So you can live without a beauty salon. You know, women can do hair in the house. You can live without a restaurant. You can cook your own food in the house. So, you know, although they're good to have, they're good conveniences, they're not necessities. Hospitals save lives. Banks invest and build communities. Supermarkets, you know, build the family, build the body, take care of the dietary nutritional needs. Schools prepare the children. Manufacturing provide our people with their daily necessities. Distribution provides jobs and allow black people to get the things that they need around the planet. When it comes to critical institutions, we are at a significant loss.
After years of observation, right, I've come to the conclusion that sports are destroying our young black brothers, making them delusional, depressed, and hopeless. I've seen this trend where you have a lot of teenagers who are not even on the team, but they have this idea that they're going to college or going to go to the league. I see a lot of young men who are they're 25 to 30 years old, still saying they're trying to get to the league. During this period now, they're not developing any skills to provide for themselves or society. Also, which you know about, parents living through their child, which contributes to it, and which I know you're going to talk on, the amount of attention given to athletes. What are your views about the relationship with sports in the black community?
I think that sports are overemphasized in the black community. And I think this ties into a legacy coming from slavery, where black men and black women our worth was determined on our physical attributes. And to a large extent, it's still the same way now. If you are an athlete, the way in which your worth is determined is identical to the way in which the worth of an enslaved African was determined. It was your output, your strength, how fast you could work, You look at the NFL combine, you look at the NBA workouts, it's nothing but a slave plantation. The only difference is you're being paid money. But the power differential between the slave and the slave master, and the power differential between the NBA player and the NBA owner, or the NFL player and the NFL owner, is the exact same as the power differential between the slave and his master. The only difference is they are given money that allows them to live a comfortable life outside of the plantation. But beyond that, it is the same thing as slavery. They don't have no voice. They're afraid. They're timid. Their behavior is strictly controlled. It is slavery. And the only reason why we don't see professional sports as slavery is because the amount of money that they make. And that's because we equate money with power. Money is not power. Money buys you access. Power gives you the ability to control outcomes. These athletes do not control outcomes, and most of them don't even control their own lives. I also think that we have to look at the fact that the Black community overvalues sports and athletics, and we undervalue academic excellence. The child who gets straight A's and B's, the child who's mentally gifted, the child who aced his SATs, the child who's in the top 1% smartest children, best reading scores, math scores, science scores, language scores, they will never get the attention of the basketball standout, even if he's an academic failure. They will never get the attention of a football standout, even if he's an academic failure. He could be failing 3 classes and he's still going to get a big trophy at the end of the year for helping them go to the playoffs or win the playoffs. He may have no future after he leaves that school that year, but because he won the championship, got us a trophy, we're going to put him on a pedestal. But the kid who's likely to come up with a cure for cancer, sitting right in his classroom, is not even going to be mentioned. And so we have to look at how we as a people have allowed public school culture and Black community culture to overvalue athletes and entertainers and undervalue our children who are academically excellent. That's on us. And then you have to look at the fact that our children don't have access to role models in those careers where they live. The dentist don't live in our neighborhood. The surgeon doesn't live in our neighborhood. The engineer doesn't live in our neighborhood. You barely find Black teachers and Black principals who live in a predominantly Black neighborhood. Most of your Black bourgeoisie, your middle class, is moving into a white life. So how are Black children going to have access to role models that might make them think twice about wanting to be an athlete or entertainer when they're not around? They're going to gravitate to what they see. And what do they see in their neighborhood? Aspiring rappers and aspiring entertainers and athletes. And what do they see on the television? Rappers who made it and athletes who made it. So whether they're outside on the street or in the house watching YouTube, all they see is Black men who overvalue athletics and entertainment, even though these are low potential careers. And what I mean by that is the likelihood of you becoming rich or wealthy or being good enough in athletics or entertainment to live comfortably off it is very slim. You have a greater chance of being struck by lightning than you do of becoming a professional athlete or entertainer. But no one's telling our children this. And this is one of the reasons why I believe we need to bring the industrial building trade programs back into our communities. Because I do believe that even if he wants to be a rapper, even if he wants to be a basketball player, if he doesn't make it and he's a licensed plumber, a licensed electrician, a licensed welder, a licensed auto mechanic, a licensed HVAC contractor, he can still live a decent life for himself. But right now, Black boys in inner city schools are only given 3 options: go into the military, become an athlete or an entertainer, or go to jail.
And Umar, I want to touch on 3 things before we move on. First thing is this: in regards to basketball, I can speak about, right? I think there are about 250,000 high school boys, seniors in the country. There are only like 1,000 something spots. Out of that 1,000 spots, you have JUCO players coming in. That's probably going to take 200 or 300. Mm-hmm. You have overseas players. So let's just say there's 600 spots for 250,000 people.
Most are not going to make it.
Even if you get the spot, you have to stay there. There's no such thing as a 4-year scholarship. Every year you have to renew based on your performance and basically your relationship with the coach at the end of the day, right? Another part I want to touch on, in defense of people who leave the neighborhood, not single people, but people with children. They want to put their children in a different environment. That's why it's kind of hard to stay, especially if you have, because I have conversations with my peers about this. It's a hard decision to make. Do I want my child to grow up in the environment I grew up in, or do I want my child to grow up in another environment? There are pros and cons to both. Because if they don't grow up in my environment, they're missing out on stuff, but at the same time, they're not being exposed to stuff. Then when you put them in a different environment, suburban, white environment, they're missing out on stuff, but at the same, they're exposed to stuff, but they're not exposed to other stuff. So it's like a two-edged sword in a sense, you know?
Here's what I would say. If I had to make the decision between, and I'm gonna start with school and go to community, but if I had to make the decision between putting my child in a white private school versus a black inner city school, I would probably go with the black inner city school. The academics are going to suffer, but I can supplement that myself at home. But if I put my child in a white suburban school and they destroy my child's self-esteem, he or she may never recover. And I've actually seen this happen as a school psychologist, where the self-esteem and the self-belief and the concept of our children were destroyed in a year's time at a white private school, and sometimes the children never recover. So for me, I think it is safer from a psychological perspective for them to remain in the hood versus go into the suburbs. Now, in terms of safety of my family, it is a tough decision. And I would not criticize a black person, parents who took their children out of the ghetto and put them in a white suburb if they were actively trying to remake that ghetto into the community that it needs to be. My issue is not so much about where you raise your children as it is about what is your commitment to creating the thriving black communities that we need. To move out and turn your back on the black community, that's an insult. But if you say I'm moving out because I cannot afford for my daughter to be snatched up and I can't afford for my son to be murdered senselessly, but I'm still in the community playing my role for the children, and I'm doing whatever I can to fight against gentrification and homelessness and crime and high school dropout, I can respect that, because although your family does not sleep in the hood, you are still active in the hood. I can respect that. But a lot of what I see are black families who abandon the black community totally once they get out into the white suburb. And we got to keep in mind, you can be abducted in the suburbs just like you be abducted in the ghetto. You can be killed in the suburb just like you can be killed in the ghetto. So a black man and woman are safe nowhere in America. But again, I can understand that move to the suburbs for the babies. I can understand it. But you yourself should never abandon the community.
And I respect that, right? There's a third thing I want to touch on, but I have to jump back. When you spoke about the self-esteem in the suburbs, I have seen personally, I have witnessed this, where the self-esteem has been destroyed being in the inner city when you're an intellectual person. So it's a tricky situation. So it's like you go there, yes, there may be a situation due to the racial dynamic at the school that can really destroy your self-esteem. But being in another environment where, as we just spoke about, academic excellence is not praised, but actually criticized and ridiculed, you also can have your self-esteem destroyed in that environment also.
I can see that. I was one of those straight A kids. You know, I can remember jokes being made about me because of my tendency to excel in the classroom. I wasn't the brightest, but I was among the top of the students. But the impact that had on me over the long run was minuscule compared to what could have happened to me when I lived in a white neighborhood. I can remember one time when we did live in a white neighborhood, and I remember I had white playmates, and I still remember I was in second grade, and the white man came across the street and knocked on my door and told my father that he didn't want to see me near his children anymore. I still remember to this day. So let me compare the insults of my peers in the ghetto in the black North Philadelphia school, okay? And let me compare that to one time hearing this white man tell my father he didn't want to see me around his children anymore. You know what affected me more as a child? It was what that white man said to my father one time. That weighed more heavily on me than all the insults of my peers put together. At the end of the day, I'm riding with the ghetto against the suburb.
All right. And the third thing I want to touch on, back to the sports, was we didn't talk about parents, right? There's a very toxic culture, sports culture across the board, and obviously we're included, where the parents themselves have a one-track mind for their child. They're using the child for this meal ticket. There are two things. The parent is trying to relive their childhood through the child. Then the other aspect is the parent is trying to get a meal ticket from the child.
I've seen that. I see it all the time. It's one of the biggest problems I think we have in the black community. I remember one time getting a phone call from a father. He said, Dr. Umar, I need you to talk to my son. I said, why? He said, he's a gifted athlete. He's about 6'5" tall. He could play basketball or football. He could dominate. Whenever he gets on that field, he can dominate, but he has no interest in it. He wants to be a barber. I still remember the conversation. I said, what's wrong with him being a barber? That man could end up owning 50 barbershops, training black kids all over the country, keeping them out of jail, teaching them a livable skill, donating money to community institutions. What's wrong with him being a barber? The problem was the father wanted to relive his academic dreams through his son. And it's something that I refer to as athletic abuse. Athletic abuse, when a father or mother, but it's usually the father, because they didn't achieve what they wanted to achieve in the world of athletics, they now put that burden on their son, who may not even be interested in being an athlete, but because they want to please their dad, they don't want to disappoint their father. They get into football, get into basketball, get into baseball, get into track, get into boxing, simply because they want to please their father. And it's a very dangerous road, because they can end up losing themselves and losing their father if they don't succeed or decide that they want to walk away at a certain point. It's a very big problem in the black community.
There's a little secret amongst athletes. You know, athletics is what do you want to call it? What's the term they use? Machismo? I don't know the term.
Okay.
That type of vibe, but they don't really, you have to be in the kind of circle to interact. Many athletes only play the sport for attention, right?
Okay.
Because think about that average athlete. He's kind of tall, kind of odd looking, kind of not normal in a sense, right? There's another aspect too. Athletics was the only vehicle of approval and attention from their own parents or guardian.
It can be.
So back to what you were saying.
And definitely a vehicle. Athletics is a vehicle of attention and approval from peers, particularly if you're not popular or if you're not in the in crowd. You know, so if I go back to when I was in school, I was just straight academic. That was just me. You know, so I really didn't care. You know, I had my friends and everything, but I wasn't like part of the in crowd, if you would. I was part of the academic nerdy crowd. You understand? And I could see where some children may not have been self-assured as much as I was, where let me get into this to see if I can earn some more stripes with the popular people in the school. And I do agree with you that a lot of children do end up going into sports, especially if they're good at it, to try to attract a following, to try to be initiated or accepted by those who get the respect in the community and within the school. But I think it's more has to do with trying to please their father and build that relationship. Because for a lot of boys, unfortunately, they may have a father who will only come see them when they're playing a game. So this is my road to getting my father more involved in my life. If he can't brag about me to his friends, he may not see me. So, you know, I think there's a lot of different ways in which that athletic abuse operates in that father-son relationship. And sometimes mothers feel powerless about intervening because they do recognize that through athletics, you can learn a lot of lifelong traits and skills, the teamwork, the team building, understanding how to live with loss and being humble in victory. Athletics can teach a lot. It's very therapeutic if the coach has a mindset for developing the children. But when a coach has a mindset that is all about wins and losses, that coach can also end up being guilty of athletic abuse. I've seen coaches destroy the self-esteem of children as much as I've seen fathers do it. And when the father is the coach, if I could be in charge, fathers could not coach their own sons unless they had a psychological evaluation. It was deemed healthy enough to do it, because there's nothing more tyrannical than to be an athlete with a narcissistic father as your coach who you got to go home with. Nothing is more tyrannical.
We recently interviewed a brilliant brother named Lawrence Ija, who spoke about the issue amongst Black elders across all industries and walks of life, not passing the baton to the younger generation, which has led to stagnation of growth and the discouragement and resentment amongst the younger generation. Have you witnessed this?
I have. The Black community suffers from a lack of intergenerational transfer of power. And in order to understand why the Black community struggles from this lack of intergenerational transfer of power, you have to understand the castration of the Black male's ego by the white power structure. This also speaks to the earlier conversation on sports and athletics as well. It's one of the only vehicles where you can challenge a white person without them feeling threatened and being motivated by a need to seek revenge against you. You know, if you dunk on a white guy on the court, it's okay. If you tackle a white guy on a football field, it's okay. So only through sports is black aggression, if you would, unbridled masculinity is actually celebrated. It's the only place where it's celebrated where it is not feared or punished. So when we come over to the sphere of black leadership, you have that same type of situation where if I'm not used to having power, if I'm not used to tasting power and having authority, when I get some, I never want to share it. We have to realize that most black men have suffered from some form of psychological castration at the hands of the white power structure. We are not allowed to maximize our God-given intellectual talents. As a result of that, when we come into the black community and we become preachers or leaders, we can get so intoxicated with that authority that we never want to share it or pass it down. That's why you see so many black elders in leadership positions. Not to say that we should ever throw our elders away. As the quote goes, we need elders for wisdom, young men for war. So you don't toss the elders aside. We continue to drink from their wisdom as the black men go out into war. We need the elders to coach us through that battle. So they are never to be discarded. But in our community, we have a situation where the elders are still the leaders. 80 years old, I'm the newly elected president. 75 years old, I'm the newly elected president. 90 years old, I'm still the face of my organization. Why hasn't this been passed down yet? Elders are not interested in going to jail. They're not interested in being martyrs. They no longer attract the energy and the attention of the youth. So why does the black community have so many elders? Because black men are drunk on power. It is a problem that we have had for at least the last 60 or 70 years. Why do you have 1 million churches? It's not because everybody's in love with Jesus. Why do you have 1 million masjids? It's not because everybody's in love with Muhammad. The problem is when that 25-year-old pastor comes back to the church after seminary, he's ready to get a couple sermons on Sunday. But the senior pastor, who's 60, 70 years old, no, young man, wait your turn. But you can't let me do one, just one? No, this is my church. I built this church. My grandfather gave me this church. His grandfather gave me this church. The same thing with our community-based organizations. So the young man gets tired of waiting. He leaves, starts his own church. And here's the irony and the paradox. When he gets to be 60, he's going to do exactly to the next young man what his pastor did to him. This is why we have old people running all the civil rights organizations, old people running most of the religious organizations in our community. We do not believe in training the youth because we don't want to be surpassed by the youth.
And there's another aspect to it we need to touch on, is the fact that sharing of information. It's like people purposely withhold information for the younger generation.
Yes.
And they criticize them for their lack of information.
Yes. I've seen it. You see it in the black consciousness community, where brothers don't necessarily want to share what they know because what they know is their egotistical claim to fame. So if I normalize this information, I'm no longer special. And that's how you can tell who's really sincere about the freedom struggle and who's not. So if I look at my work, I give it all out. I'm going to teach you everything that I know so you can take this and teach it to the next generation. It's not about being special. It's about being effective. But we got to keep in mind, black men and black women come into the black consciousness community or the community grassroots struggle for personal reasons, not community reasons. Okay, people start churches not because they want to help people. Not most of the time. They do it because they want to help themselves. You see that. And when you are serving your ego and you're not serving the people, it will show. Because if you're serving the people, if someone better than you comes along, you will gladly include them. You may not pass the baton, but they have a seat at your table now because the people can benefit from this young man and this young woman if you're serving the people. But if you're serving your ego and you are in this primarily to be worshiped and celebrated and adored, anyone with a stronger skill set than you is automatically a threat and they become the enemy. And you've seen this through history. We've had black leaders who've been assassinated over ego and people feeling threatened over their right to be the face on a particular movement. Not only in America, you've seen this in Africa, you've seen it in the Caribbean islands, where the understudy or the next in line takes out the leader because they're tired of waiting and they want to be next. So, that ego of the black man is something that has to be studied. And I think that those of us who are in leadership positions, we have to guard against it within our own person. And then we also have to guard against it around the people who are around us. I know for me, the brothers who I work with, I'm always studying them to see whether or not they are here for the people or whether they are here because they want power and authority. You should only be here because you want what's best for black people. Abraham Lincoln, and I'm not a fan, he was a racist, but Abraham Lincoln said something that I do agree with. And he said, quote, "Anybody can withstand adversity." He said, that's not the true measure of a man. He said, the true measure of a man is whether or not they know how to effectively use power. He said, give a man power, and that's when you really see what his true character and integrity are.
Is it realistic to expect a politician to do things for an unorganized group? I'm not saying organized group, an unorganized group that has not funded their campaigns.
Is it realistic to expect politicians to do something beneficial for a disorganized constituency? I have two answers. On the one hand, I would say yes, because if you are a sincere freedom fighter for your people, if you really sought office to improve the conditions of African people, whether they are organized or disorganized, you should struggle for them. I look at Dr. King, I look at Malcolm. They were not politicians, but they struggled for their people. I look at Coleman Young, the mayor of New York City. I look at Adam Clayton Powell, U.S. congressman from New York. Their people were disorganized, but they still struggled for them. Harold Washington out of Chicago, he still struggled for them. So I don't think it is I cannot accept the excuse that the reason I'm not serving my people is because they're not organized enough to finance my campaign or protect me from ridicule and slander from white folks who will see my work on behalf of the community as a threat. I cannot accept that, because a man should be a man at all times. It's just like when people ask me about Barack Obama, they say, well, what could he have done? He could have spoke up to your conditions. That's what he could have did. At the end of the day, are you a man or are you not? Period. Because a man is going to do what's right all the time, not just when it's beneficial or convenient for him. My other answer, is it realistic for black people to expect a politician to do for them if they're not organized and don't finance the campaign? It's not realistic at all. We do not have the type of black men and women in public office we had 50, 60, 70 years ago. We don't have them anymore. We have people who are self-serving, very scared of white folks, and they are not willing to stick their neck out for black people at all unless they're sure that neck can come back to them. So I think black people have better recognize that, understand that. And to some extent, I'm a little defensive of the politician from the perspective of why should he or she risk it all for a group of people who doesn't value them enough to come together, organize, and finance what's going on. In order for electoral politics to be beneficial for African people, we have to organize and we have to weaponize our money and our votes. Until we select who we want to represent us and finance their campaigns, black elected officials will never benefit black people. Never. You'll never get black people in office to do the job we need them to do until we select them and finance them ourselves. But that's a conversation we don't want to have, because black people are not interested in becoming economically responsible in the interest of their liberation. We will pray, we will march, we will vote. But don't you ever ask me to use my money for the collective best interests of black people. We don't do that. That is our eternal weakness, and that is why we are so effectively exploited financially by other groups. The black dollar is the easiest dollar to get in America because it is not partial to the man who owns it. The black dollar is colorblind. No other dollar in America is colorblind. The Jewish dollar is racist. The Arab's dollar is racist. The Latino dollar, the Anglo-Saxon dollar is racist. The Native American dollar is racist. What I mean by that, their money is partial to their community and does not like to touch the hand of anyone outside that community. But the black dollar, easiest dollar to get. It is not partial. It is not racist. It is not biased to black people. How can your money not be partial to your interests? That is insane. But that is exactly why we're dealing with economic devastation in the black community.
Please speak about the Carlee Russell disappearance situation.
Carlee Russell had a situation a few weeks ago, maybe just two, where allegedly she pulled over, saw a little kid walking, called her parents, I believe, then called the police and said, there's a kid here. She got out the car. Next thing you know, she went missing. She reappeared a couple of days later. I believe they saw a camera, saw her walking home. From what I hear, allegedly, her story didn't add up. Just the other day, she confessed through her parents that she made the whole thing up. The police also stated that the whole thing was manufactured. She could be facing charges. I hope she don't face charges. I hope she don't go to jail. I don't ever want to see a black woman in a prison. What I do want Sister Carlee to understand, because she's only like 25, she's a baby. But what I do want her to understand, you cannot play with abduction and kidnapping with black women. According to the United States government, 250,000 women were kidnapped in America in 2020. This is COVID. 250,000. Of those 250,000, 40% or more than 100,000 of them were black women. Black women are only 13% of the American population. How can 13% of the American population represent 40% of kidnappings and abductions? My point to Sister Carlee is, by you playing with this abduction thing as it relates to black women, you are giving the white racist media and the white racist American power structure the prerogative to spin a narrative that says black women are not being abducted as much as we say. Most of them are falsely claiming to have been kidnapped, and they are not. They can use Carlee Russell's situation and other black women who have done the same, it's only been a few, and use this as a campaign, as your sister Candace Owens is doing, to make it look like the kidnapping and sex trafficking of black females is being exaggerated. It is not being exaggerated. In fact, it's being underreported because a lot of them who go kidnapped or abducted are never reported at all. So I'm saying to Sister Carlee, she owes an apology to black women for what she did, because you are fueling a machine that coons like Candace and the white power structure are using to undermine the abductions of black women. See, in Carlee's situation, the whole black community came to her aid. Everybody was posting her on their page. I posted her on my page. I haven't seen a kidnapped black woman get that much media attention in a long time, if ever. So it hurts the pride of the black community that the person we did this for turned around to be an imposter who fabricated the whole situation to get attention from her soon-to-be baby daddy, allegedly. So Carlee did us a great disservice with this, and the fact that it got national news media attention made it all the more worse, because now this is going to undermine the next black woman who is actually kidnapped, abducted, or sex trafficked. I need black women not to play with your safety. I want to say this, though. I have to say this. If Carlee is guilty, Carlee owes us an apology. Carlee needs to get involved as an activist in black female sex trafficking and childhood abductions. but we have not yet heard from Carly. We've only heard from Carly through her parents. Until I hear from Carly directly, I must keep the option open that there's a very strong possibility she was kidnapped, but because of the outcry for her return, she was allowed to return under the threat of death or punishment if she reveals any details about what happened. I'm only saying that because I'm not understanding why we haven't heard from her at all. We haven't even seen her except for the alleged video camera footage of her coming back home. So until we see her, I must entertain the possibility that this was an actual kidnapping and that Carly was returned because those involved didn't want to get exposed, but she's being forced to confess untruthfully that she was kidnapped in order to protect her life and the life of her family. I have to keep that option alive until I hear from her.
Please talk about how the immigration laws passed in Florida will impact the economy and African American employment.
The immigration situation, in my opinion, currently is being pushed by the white power structure because they want to use the immigrants to replace black people. I've been saying this for about 5 years, maybe even longer. But when Joe Biden said when he got elected that he wanted to fast track 4 to 8 million illegal immigrants to American citizenship as quickly as possible, I believe that was the writing on the wall then. The Democratic Party is tired of depending on black people's votes. They are tired of being painted as the black party because they're not. They don't care about blacks, but they have to act like they do at election time to get those votes. So what are they going to do? We've got the Ukrainians, we got the Afghanis, we got the illegal Mexicans. We also have the South American migrants coming in, and we're going to try to fast track them to citizenship as quickly as possible before November of 2024. So we don't have to rely on the black vote as much. We can now go after the migrant vote. That's what's happening. Why would the federal government allow the governor of Florida to fill up buses full of migrants and drive them halfway across the country to Chicago? Why would the federal government allow the governor of Texas to fill up coach buses full of migrants and planes full of migrants and fly them to New York City? These are the two most crowded cities in America. They don't even have any space left, but you're allowing Florida and Texas to drive migrants halfway across the country to New York and Chicago. And then when they get to New York and Chicago, you tell the black mayors of New York and Chicago, Mayor Eric Adams and Mayor Brandon Johnson, that you're going to use your budget, black people's tax dollars. You're going to use that money to find emergency housing, medical care, shelter, and social services for these people. The homelessness rate in America is the highest it's been since the 60s. There are at least 30,000 homeless blacks in New York. There's at least 20,000 homeless blacks in Chicago.
Gotta mention Philly, bro.
Philadelphia leads the nation, percentage-wise in Philadelphia, leads the nation in homelessness. But we don't have the migrant crisis yet as bad. We have migrants, but it's not as bad as Chicago and New York. Is it a coincidence that they're sending all these migrants to these two congested cities because these are the two biggest black voter blocks in the country? They're the two most socially and politically conscious black groups in the country. And because we don't want to answer to black people and we don't want to be accountable to black people, we're going to liquidate the Negroes out of New York and Chicago and turn these cities into migrant centers. That is exactly what they are doing. The same schools that they said they could not afford to operate in Chicago are operating now as 24-hour homeless shelters for migrants. If you didn't have the money to operate this school from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., how did you find the money overnight to operate the school 24 hours a day as a migrant shelter? Totally unacceptable.
Also recently, can you speak about the situation where the judge dismissed the case for the Tulsa reparations?
Yes, a couple of weeks ago, the oldest living survivors of the 1921 Tulsa race riot had their petition for reparations thrown out in Oklahoma. 3 points I want to make on this. Number one, this was an insult to African people everywhere. It was an insult to our ancestors who were murdered in Tulsa during the Black Wall Street Massacre of May 1921. And it was an insult to those elders who are still living 100 years after that situation took place to not get any form of restitution for themselves or their ancestors. 3 points. Point number one, the reparations movement is gaining momentum. It's gaining momentum. Because it's gaining momentum, the government doesn't want to feed it in any way by acknowledging reparations for any of the massacres that took place in American history. In other words, slavery was the biggest massacre. That may one day see the Supreme Court. Reparations for African people may one day see the Supreme Court. If we give reparations to Tulsa, or reparations to Rosewood, or reparations to Wilmington, North Carolina, or reparations to Charleston, South Carolina, for those Black Wall Streets that we destroyed, are we not setting a legal precedent upon which an argument for reparations for slavery could be made to American Africans living in this country? I believe a decision was made at the top of the power structure that case had to be thrown out, because if they get reparations for what we did to them in Tulsa, we're going to have to give reparations to Black people for what we did to them in slavery. That's number one. Number two, I think it is also a test to see how Black America reacts. They want to see how we react to Tulsa to gauge our seriousness on how we would respond if they strike down reparations in America. Because I believe there's a strong chance they're going to strike it down for Black folks. So they want to get a gauge on our reaction to how we would respond if they say we're not giving out any reparations. Because there was a poll that went out. And the poll that went out, it's a couple months ago, they polled different Americans on their views on reparations for slavery. Latinos, Arabs, they went to everybody. Most people are not for it. Most people, Latinos are not for it. Asians, no, very few people support reparations for Blacks, which makes sense because they don't value Black life. But from where I'm sitting, why are you asking Chinese what they think about the slavery you put me through? Why are you asking Arabs and East Indians and Latinos who were not enslaved in America what they think about this? This is between the U.S. government and African people. This does not involve Chinese, Arabs, Jews, or well, Jews it does because they participated, but it doesn't involve Chinese, Arabs, East Indians, Latinos, Mexicans, or nobody else. Why are you asking them? You know why they're asking them? America wants to make sure the immigrants are on their side. So when they say we're not giving Black people reparations for slavery, it'll look like it's a national decision that this would not be good for the country. And I believe Tulsa was just the first step towards the U.S. government striking down a fight for reparations. I believe reparations is going to end up in front of the Supreme Court, and more effectively, I think it may need to end up at the International Criminal Court of Justice, the Geneva Convention, and on the main floor of the United Nations. I don't think it ends in America.
In regards to reparations, right? I've heard a lot of different conversations and perspectives, but people fail to speak a lot about education. People need to be educated collectively as a culture to what to do with land or money. Financial illiteracy is the Achilles heel of our people. So I think that in preparation for receiving any form of reparations, we need to start an educational program in regards to what to do with the money collectively, not from an individual standpoint.
Yes, indeed. I agree. I agree that there needs to be financial literacy, but I also agree that there's a few things that need to take place even before that. Number one, how do you give reparations to a disorganized people? How do you give reparations to a disorganized people? Until we come together and choose the group that we want to advocate for this and disseminate this, I don't think it needs to be given out. Number two, who decided that reparations will be given to individuals? Who decided that? Reparations is for the repair of African people. It's not for people to pay their bills. It's not a stimulus check. It's not a tax return. It is for repair.
Can you say that one more time? I think people view reparations as an individual check to your household to do as you please.
Slavery was done to a group of people, a race of people. Reparations is designed to address the harm and damage done to the group. Reparations is not a dissemination of 50 million individual checks so you can go spend the money as you choose. If you do that, we get nothing from it because we are too disorganized. Who believes for 1 minute that every individual black person gets a check and we are going to bring them checks back together again to solve our problems? That's not going to happen. First of all, if you believe that we're going to use the money as a group, why would you need an individual check in the first place? So in my opinion, this idea that every black person gets a slice of the money is sabotage in and of itself to make sure the reparations is never used for anything good. That's why I have went on the record to say, and I'm going to say it again now, I believe in reparations. I support reparations. Pan-Africanists, we gave birth to the movement anyway. This didn't hop up yesterday with the YouTube people. This is as old as Pan-Africanism. But I believe that reparations should not be disseminated individually or in group until a more responsible generation of African people come along. I have very little faith in those of us in this country right now. I have very little faith that those of us in this country right now would use this restitution package in a way that would maximize its benefit to the generation alive now and future generations still to come. Remember, reparations is not just for us alive. It's for the ancestors. What do we do for their legacy? What do we do for their memory? It's for all of those yet unborn. Every American African hereafter should benefit from that. What are we going to set up for every unborn child so they have a good chance at a good life? Do they all get this? Do they all get a house? Do they all get land? Every African child born from now into perpetuity will get 100 acres, 40 acres, 20 acres. I haven't heard a single conversation on what we're going to do for the unborn with this reparations package. To me, it seems like Negroes think that all of this is for us alive. We're so special. It ain't about the ancestors. It's not about the unborn. It's for those of us alive. I disagree with that. I disagree with individual checks. And I believe the reparations, although we can continue to agitate and advocate for it, it should not be disseminated until a more responsible group of American Africans are here to accept it and use it in a responsible manner. Maybe our grandchildren, maybe our great-grandchildren. But you're talking about the Negroes right now in the second decade of the 21st century? Hell no. And the other point I want to say on this, very little attention is being paid to the mental costs of slavery.
All right,
What about the psychological damage? Why are we not quantifying the psychological damage? 243 years of unpaid labor with cost of living adjustments. That'd be a nice piece of change. But what about the psychological damage? The reason we even want reparations today is for what? The psychological damage. Why we snow bunny hopping? Why we killing each other? Why black women desecrating their bodies? Why black boys only want to be athletes? Why do our children still see black as ugly? Why we don't have our own banks, our own schools, our own supermarkets, our own hospitals, our own distribution, our own manufacture? It's because of the damage done here. Not the field labor. That ain't nothing. It's the psychological. Also, I don't hear enough attention being paid to land. I'm hearing money. Money is a trap. The worst thing we could do is accept a cash payout. And why? The American dollar doesn't have a mineral equivalent. It was taken off the gold standard decades ago. How do you allow someone to pay for the worst human crime in history with money that has no mineral value? Does that make it the worst crime in human history is going to be paid for by money that has no mineral value? Do you know what that means? He can give us, hypothetically, I'm going to give y'all $20 trillion. Don't you know tomorrow he can drop the price of the dollar through inflation? So what was 20 trillion is only worth 10. Another year we're going to drop it again. Now you worth 500 million and drop it again. Just through inflation, he can reduce the value of his worthless paper dollar. Why are we even having a conversation about money? Now, some people got upset. They said, Dr. Umar, what's wrong with us having some money? My brother, if the reparations demand list is what it should be, you should be able to earn your own money. I want land. I want resources. I want control of certain assets. I want certain rights and privileges that nobody else got. If I'm getting what I want, I don't need money because I can get money from all of this that I have. For example, black people, 60% of us are largely congregated in 10 states: California, Michigan, Illinois, Texas, Florida, New Jersey, Virginia. It's 10. And they're all seaboarding. Why not say for the 10 states where we predominate, we control the seaboard. We control the import to export. We get a tax on everything coming in and come out. Why not take possession of the main apparatuses in those states where we predominate? I've heard no conversation about that. What about America's natural resources? America has gold. America has oil. America has water. America has hydroelectric. America has all kinds of natural resources. We should get a 25% cut, if not more, of all that permanently. The reason you don't want money for reparations is money runs out, but the benefit of slavery to America never runs out. So why would I take a non-renewable asset for an asset that will never expire? Why would I do that? So I don't think we're thinking deeply enough about this. I think a lot of black people just want some money. And here's my other point. On top of the fact that we should get control of all black music, we should get control of all black inventions. Hands down, we should get control of it. We should also make the American white power structure build all the institutions we need, and we will simply run it. Make them build the hospitals, make them build the school, the physical structure, make them build black Wall Streets all over the country that we will run with the money we will make from all of the land and the assets and the wealth that we will get. I don't think we're thinking deep enough. Race lineage-based reparations is a trap. Most reparations advocates in America, they say we don't want we don't want African immigrants to get any of our money, which is interesting because we give the Koreans $30 billion a year and ain't nobody complaining. Look at all the money we give to the Jews and the Arabs. Nobody's complaining about all the money